The first time Priscilla Vane threw a cup of coffee at me, it wasn't the burn that stayed with me. It was the laughter. It happened on a Tuesday, 4 minutes before 9, in the 6th floor break room of Meridian Tower, in front of 11 people who worked with me every day and had never once learned my name. Priscilla didn't throw it hard. She never did anything hard. She tipped it, almost lazily, the way you'd flick ash off a sleeve, and the coffee went down the front of my blouse in a long brown stripe while she said, in that honeyed voice she used for cruelty, that she was so sorry she hadn't seen me there. Nobody had seen me there. That was the whole point of me. My name is Wren Ashby. I was 27 years old. I had worked in accounts payable at Castellan Holdings for 3 years, and on paper I processed vendor invoices for a living. In practice, I had become something closer to furniture, the woman in cubicle 4 who came in early left late, and never once said a word when someone stepped on her. Talia Reyes, who ran payroll 2 rows over and was the only person in that building who used my first name unprompted, called it my superpower. I called it survival. I had $46,000 of medical debt from my mother's illness and 14 months since her funeral, and neither of those numbers cared whether I stood up for myself. So I mopped the coffee off my blouse in the bathroom with a fistful of paper towels, and I did not cry because crying used water I didn't have to spare, and I went back to my desk and opened the Corinth Freight file again. That file was the other thing about me nobody knew. Numbers didn't lie the way people did. Numbers held still. I had spent 6 months of nights teaching myself to read hospital billing codes so an insurance company couldn't quietly rob a dying woman, and somewhere in that grief I had discovered I had a gift for it, a mind that saw the seam in a column of digits the way other people saw a crooked picture frame. Invoice 14 from Corinth Freight Solutions was dated the same week as Invoice 9. Both were for exactly $9,900, $1 under the threshold that would have triggered a second signature. I had flagged it in March. My supervisor told me to stick to my lane. I looked at that file more than I should have. Something about it itched. The frost of Meridian did not itch. That was what people called the company's CFO, always in the tone you'd use for weather too dangerous to go outside in. Vesper Castellan ran the 41st floor the way other people ran empires, silently, completely, without a single wasted motion. I had seen her twice in 3 years, both times from a distance, both times feeling the room change temperature the moment she walked through it. People said she hadn't taken a vacation day in 6 years. People said she'd fired a man for being 5 minutes late to a board call. People said she didn't have anyone. No mate, no partner, no family beyond the mother who'd built the company and then died running it. Just glass, and altitude, and cold. I believed all of it, the way you believe a story about a mountain you'll never climb. I was still scrubbing the last of the coffee smell out of my sleeve when Talia came around the partition holding a printout against her chest like it might catch fire. Her face had gone the particular gray of someone who has just read something twice to make sure it's real. Wren, her voice cracked on the single syllable. I need you to look at this. If this is the Q3 reconciliation, it can wait until it's not the reconciliation. She set the paper on my desk, and I saw the Castellan Holdings letterhead and the words Annual HR Systems Audit, Executive Records across the top, and I still didn't understand. Not until her finger landed on a single line halfway down the page and pressed there like she was afraid the ink would move. Emergency contact. V. Castellan, CFO, Wren Ashby. I read it 3 times. It did not become less impossible. That's not me, I said. That's got to be a different Wren Ashby. Talia's eyes hadn't left my face. There is no other Wren Ashby in this company. I checked. The break room noise went distant and strange, like sound underwater. Somewhere above us, 40 floors up, sat a woman I had spoken to exactly never. A woman whose name I had only ever heard whispered like a warning. And somehow, impossibly, inexplicably, my name was the one written next to hers in case of emergency. I hadn't seen Vesper Castellan in 8 months, not since the night in the stairwell, not since I'd promised myself I would never tell a single soul what happened there. The 8 months collapsed backward, all at once, like a floor giving way. It had been late November, the ugly gray hour after 11, when the tower thinned out to security guards and vending machines. I'd stayed to deliver hard copies to the executive mailroom because the printer on 6 had jammed and month-end reports had to be signed in ink by morning. I was cutting through the stairwell between 40 and 41, faster than waiting on the elevator, when I found her. She was on the floor. Not fallen, not exactly, folded, back against the wall, one hand fisted so hard in her own collar that her knuckles had gone bloodless, breath coming in that raw, torn rhythm of someone burning from the inside. Her scent hit me before anything else did, thick and wrong in the stairwell air, something cold gone feverish, vetiver and winter flint, sharpened into a heat I didn't have a name for yet. I knew enough biology to understand what I was looking at. A rut crash, an alpha whose suppressants had failed her, alone, on a Tuesday night, in a stairwell where anyone could have found her and hadn't, because nobody stayed this late except the invisible. I almost turned around. God help me, I almost did. "Don't," she rasped, when she heard my shoe scuff the concrete. "Don't call anyone. Please." The please was what stopped me. I had never heard a rumor about the frost of Meridian that included that word. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said, crouching 2 full arms' lengths away, hands visible, voice as level as I could make it. "I need to touch your wrist to check your pulse. Is that all right? Tell me to stop, and I will." She looked at me, really looked, glassy and burning and terrified in a way that had nothing to do with me, and something in her face cracked open for one unguarded second before the executive slid back over it. "Fine," she managed. "Fine, do it." Her pulse was a hammer under my fingers. I got her water from the mailroom cooler. I got the cardigan off my own shoulders and pressed it, folded against the back of her neck, because I remembered from a college health class that cooling the gland eased the worst of it. I sat with her for 3 hours on that stairwell landing while the building emptied around us, and I did not call security, and I did not call anyone, because she had asked me not to, and something in me, some old, tired, competent part of me that had spent a year learning how to sit with someone else's pain without flinching, decided her asking was enough. Somewhere around 1 a.m, I found the tin of peppermints in my bag, the ones I'd carried every day since my mother's chemo, because the smell had once been the only thing that settled her stomach, and I pressed it into Vesper Castellan's shaking hand without thinking. "For the nausea," I said. "It helped my mom." She stared at the tin like it was written in a language she used to know. Then she closed her hand around it. By 2 a.m, the worst of the fever had broken. I called a car service and rode with her to an address in the hills that looked, from the outside, like nobody actually lived there. She was foggy by then, half present, her grip on my hand tightening every time the car took a curve, and just before we reached her door, she said the only other thing she said to me all night. "Don't let go of my hand until I tell you it's safe." I didn't. Not until she was standing on her own doorstep, steadier, the porch light throwing gold across a face that had gone, for one unguarded moment, almost young. "Thank you," she said. Formal again already, the mask sliding back into place plate by plate. "You don't have to remember this," I told her, because I meant it, because I didn't want anything from her, because the last thing I needed was the frost of Meridian owing the mouse from Cubicle 4 a debt she'd resent paying. I won't say anything. I hadn't. 8 months of silence, and I'd told myself the whole thing had simply evaporated. One more thing that happened to me and mattered to no one but me. And now, Talia was standing over my desk with a printout that said otherwise. Ren, Des Okafor's voice, when it reached me 20 minutes later, was clipped enough to cut glass, coming through my desk phone like a summons rather than a request. I had spoken to the chief of staff exactly once before, in an elevator, and she had not smiled then either. "Miss, Castellan needs to see you." Now, 41st floor. I looked down at my coffee-stained blouse, at the Corinth's freight file still open on my screen, at Talia's stricken face, and I thought, absurdly, uselessly, that I should have worn something else that morning. Then I stood up, and I went. The elevator to the 41st floor did not feel like rising. It felt like being pulled. Nobody spoke to me in the hallway. Nobody needed to. The receptionist's eyes did enough talking, tracking me from the elevator to the double glass doors like I was a stain that had wandered off the carpet. Des met me at the threshold, tall, unsmiling. A woman who looked like she had spent 9 years learning exactly how much of herself to show, and had settled on none. She didn't offer her hand. 5 minutes, she said. "Ms. Castellan is between calls." The office beyond the glass was nothing like I'd imagined. I'd pictured marble and gold, the kind of wealth that announces itself. Instead, it was spare, almost to the point of ache, pale wood, a single window running floor to ceiling. One framed photograph turned slightly away from the door so no visitor could see the face in it. The kind of room built by someone who had decided, a long time ago, that owning less meant losing less. And there she was, standing at the window with her back to me, dark suit, spine so straight it looked load-bearing, and even across the room I caught it, vetiver and winter flint, sharp and cold and entirely unmistakable. The scent I had spent 8 months trying to convince myself I'd imagined. "Close the door, Des," she said, without turning. The latch clicked behind me like a held breath finally let go. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. I stood on the pale wood floor in my ruined blouse, with my hands knotted in front of me, and Vesper Castellan stood at her window, with the whole gray sky behind her, and I understood, with the particular clarity of the truly frightened, that I had absolutely no idea what came next. "You're the one from the stairwell," she said finally. Not a question. Her voice was lower than I remembered, controlled in a way that hadn't been available to her that night. November, yes, my own voice, came out smaller than I wanted. I told myself I imagined the tin of peppermints. "You didn't." She turned then, and I watched her take me in. The coffee stain, the tired eyes, the person she'd apparently decided, in some unguarded corner of her mind 8 months ago, to trust with her life in an emergency. Something crossed her face too fast to name. Recognition, maybe shame. "This is a clerical error," she said. "I'll have it corrected today." It landed harder than I expected. "Of course," I said. "I never asked to be. I didn't even know." "I'm aware." A muscle moved in her jaw. I was not entirely myself that night. I made a decision I wouldn't have made otherwise, and it should never have reached payroll, let alone an audit. She said it like an apology built entirely out of policy language, every soft edge sanded off before it left her mouth. I should have felt relief. Instead, something in my chest went tight and stupid and hurt, and I hated myself for it, because what had I expected? That the frost of Meridian would fall to her knees in gratitude for a stranger's cardigan and a tin of mints? I'll have Des update the file, she said, already turning back toward the window, already retreating behind the glass version of herself. You're free to go, Miss Ashby, I said. Wren Ashby. She went very still. I know, she said quietly, to the window, not to me. I have known your name for 8 months. Neither of us said anything else. But she didn't correct the file that day. And when I got back to my desk, the coffee stain on my blouse had dried into something the exact color of the vetiver in my memory, and I couldn't stop noticing. I told myself it was a one-time summons. It wasn't. 3 days later, Des called down again, a courier package that needed executive sign-off, nothing that couldn't have waited for interoffice mail, and I understood before I even reached the 41st floor that the errand was an excuse built by someone unused to building excuses. Vesper signed the package without reading it. Then she asked, not quite looking up, whether I'd eaten lunch. I hadn't. I never really did. Most days, the math of $46,000 didn't leave much room for a sandwich that cost $12. She didn't say anything about that. She simply pressed a button on her desk phone and told Des, in the same flat executive tone she used for board calls, to have something sent up from the kitchen for 2. You don't have to do that, I said. I'm aware, she said again. It seemed to be her answer to most things, that I don't have to. I'd like to, anyway. We ate in near silence at the small table by the window, and it was the strangest 20 minutes of my year. Her, unbending by degrees I could measure only in the loosening of her shoulders. Me, watching a woman famous for eating no lunches at all quietly finish half a sandwich, because I'd made the mistake of saying my mother used to make something similar. She asked what. I told her, cardamom rice pudding. On cold days, the kind you eat standing at the stove, because it never lasts long enough to sit down with. Something moved behind her eyes when I said it, filed away and locked. The way I would only later learn was how she kept everything that mattered to her. That was the pattern for 2 weeks. A summons dressed as a task. A silence that got easier to sit in. Once, reaching for the same folder, our hands brushed, and she pulled back like she'd touched a live wire, and neither of us mentioned it, and I thought about it for 3 straight days. It was Priscilla Vane who ended the truce. I met her properly on a Thursday, in the 41st floor hallway, on my way out from another manufactured errand. She was waiting for me by the elevators, arms folded, dressed in the kind of expensive that whispers rather than shouts, and she smiled at me the way a cat smiles at something smaller. You're the little mouse from accounts payable, she said. I've heard so much. I don't think we've met. We haven't needed to. Her eyes tracked me head to foot, cataloging, pricing. I've known Vesper since we were girls, you understand. Our mothers built this company together. There's history there, the kind you don't read about in a personnel file. She stepped closer, voice dropping to something almost kind, which was worse than cruelty. I'd hate for you to get confused about what this is. She does this. Collects strays. It never lasts. I'm not a stray. No, Priscilla agreed, smiling wider. You're an emergency contact. There's a difference, but I understand how it might be hard to tell. She reached out and straightened my collar with 2 fingers, an intimacy I hadn't invited, her nails just short of my throat. Be careful in that stairwell, Wren. It's dangerous this time of year. The elevator arrived before I could answer. I rode it down 41 floors with my heart slamming and her perfume. Something sweet and synthetic, nothing like Vesper's cold, honest cedar dark scent, still clinging to my collar like a warning. I didn't tell Vesper about it. I told Des, instead, the next time she waylaid me by the executive mailroom, because Des had the particular unreadable face of someone who already knew more than she said. Priscilla Vane, Des said, testing the name like it tasted bad, was set to marry Miss Castellan 8 years ago. Arranged by their mothers. 2 shipping families, 1 merger, tied up with a bow. It fell apart when Miss Castellan met someone else. She looked at me for a long moment. Priscilla has never once believed it was really over. Someone else, I repeated. Dez's jaw tightened, the first crack I'd seen in 9 years of practiced neutrality. That's not my story to tell. She checked the hallway, then lowered her voice. But I'll tell you this much, since apparently no one else will. In 9 years, I have never seen her stop mid-meeting to ask if someone's eaten. Do with that what you like. I didn't know what to do with it. I only knew that the following Monday, a memo went out from corporate development, Priscilla's department, flagging irregularities in vendor onboarding, and that Corinth's Freight Solutions was, for the first time in 6 months, quietly pulled from the active vendor list before anyone could look at it twice. I noticed. Of course I noticed. Noticing was the one thing I was good at. I should have said something right then. Instead, I filed the invoice numbers away in the same place I kept everything that frightened me, and I went back to my desk, and I told myself it wasn't my problem. It became my problem 9 days later, in the worst room in the building. I was summoned to the 41st floor a 5th time, but this summons came with no pretense of a courier package. Dez met me at the elevator with a face gone entirely to stone and walked me not to Vesper's office, but to the glass-walled conference room where the board convened, where 6 people I had never met sat around a table with folders in front of them, and Priscilla Vane sat at the head like she'd been born there. "Ms. Ashby," Priscilla said, sweet as spoiled fruit, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "Thank you for coming. We have some questions about your access to vendor records." Vesper was in the room, standing at the far wall, arms crossed, face arranged into something I hadn't seen from her since the stairwell, pure executive ice, nothing behind the eyes at all. And I understood in one sick lurch of my stomach that whatever came next, she was not going to be the one to stop it. "I flagged Corinth's Freight in March," I said, before Priscilla could finish laying her trap. "I have the email. My supervisor told me to drop it." "How curious," Priscilla said, sliding a printed page across the table, "that the account you flagged is the same account whose login credentials were used 4 times this quarter, outside of business hours, to alter payment routing information. From a terminal in accounts payable." "Your terminal, Miss Ashby," the room tilted. "That's not possible. I was home." "I can prove, can you?" Priscilla's smile didn't move. "Because right now, what I can prove is a paper trail, an unauthorized emergency contact filing, and a great deal of unsupervised access to the CFO's office in the last 3 weeks. The board will decide what that adds up to." I simply thought Miss Castellan should be spared the appearance of involvement. She let the words sit in the air like smoke. Given the history. I looked at Vesper. I willed her to say something, anything, to look at me the way she had over cardamom rice pudding and stolen lunches. She looked back at me the way you'd look at a stranger on a train. "Security will escort Miss Ashby to collect her belongings," she said, voice flat as a closed ledger. "Effective immediately, she's suspended pending investigation." The words hit me like the coffee had, sudden, cold, and in front of everyone. Vesper. It came out before I could stop it, too familiar for the room, and I watched Priscilla's eyes light with delight at the slip. "Miss Castellan." Vesper corrected, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. "That will be all, Miss Ashby. I don't remember walking out." I remember the security guard's hand hovering near my elbow without quite touching it, the eyes of every person on 6 turning to watch the mouse get carried out of the maze at last, and I remember standing on the sidewalk outside Meridian Tower with a cardboard box holding 3 years of my life, thinking that the worst part wasn't the accusation. The worst part was that she hadn't defended me at all. I didn't sleep that night, or the one after. I sat at my kitchen table with the box from my desk and went through it piece by piece. A chipped mug with a painted wren on the side that had been my mother's, a stapler. A photograph of Elin Ashby laughing on a beach I'd never been to, and underneath all of it, forgotten at the bottom, the Corinth's freight file I'd printed for myself back in March, the one nobody had ever bothered to take away from me because nobody had thought the mouse would keep her own copy. I spread every page across the table. Invoice numbers, dates, routing changes. My hands remembered how to do this, even when the rest of me had gone numb, the pattern I'd first caught 8 months ago, back when it was one uneven column and a bad feeling, revealed itself now as something enormous. Corinth's Freight Solutions had never shipped a single crate. Every invoice routed to the same 3 offshore accounts, in amounts calibrated, always, to sit $1 under a signature threshold someone had clearly memorized. And buried in the onboarding paperwork, 4 years old, was a signature I recognized from every internal memo I'd ever filed. Priscilla Vanes. 3 days after that, sitting alone in the dark, I finally understood something else. The suppressant that had failed Vesper in that stairwell 8 months ago had come from a specialty pharmacy account managed, according to the internal records I still had access to on my personal laptop from an old work login nobody had thought to revoke, by corporate development. Priscilla's department. A formulation substitution, quietly authorized 6 days before the crash. Not an accident. A message sent to a woman who'd once chosen someone else over her, dressed up as a clerical mistake. I sat with that fact until the sun came up, my mother's chipped mug cooling in my hands, and I understood that I had 2 choices. I could stay quiet, the way I had stayed quiet my whole life, and let the mouse get eaten. Or I could do the one thing I had ever been good at. I could make the numbers talk. I called Des at 7 in the morning. She didn't pick up. I called again at 7:05 and again at 7:11, and on the 4th call she answered with a voice rough from sleep and no patience left for me. "Miss Ashby, if this is about your suspension, you need to speak to HR. Not. I have proof Priscilla Vane embezzled at least 2 years of company funds through a shell vendor, and I have proof she tampered with Vesper's medication 8 months ago," I said, all in one breath, before my nerve could fail me. "I need 10 minutes, not with security, with her." Silence stretched long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then Des said, very quietly, "The board reconvenes in 6 hours to finalize the investigation. If you're wrong about this, Miss Ashby, you will never work in finance again." I'm not wrong. Another silence. 41st floor, 9 o'clock. Bring everything. I brought everything. 3 years of quiet competence poured into a single binder, invoice trails, routing logs, the pharmacy authorization with Priscilla's initials on it, cross-referenced and color-coded the way I'd once cross-referenced my mother's medical bills at 2 in the morning. Because grief had taught me there was no shortcut around doing the work completely. Vesper was waiting alone when Des let me in, standing at that same window, and for one terrible moment I thought she was going to send me away again. Then she turned, and I saw what the executive mask had been hiding for 4 days: hollowed eyes, a jaw that hadn't unclenched, a woman who looked like she hadn't slept any better than I had. "I had to suspend you in that room," she said, before I could speak, the words coming out fast and low, stripped of every ounce of boardroom polish. If I'd defended you in front of the board with Priscilla holding an unverified fraud allegation and an emergency contact filing as ammunition, I'd have handed her exactly what she wanted, proof I was compromised, proof to have me removed from oversight of my own company's finances. I have spent 4 days trying to find a way to fix this that didn't require sacrificing you to do it. I did not find one in time. I am sorry. It wasn't an excuse dressed as policy this time. It was the truth, offered plainly, and it cost her something to say it. I could see that in the way her hands had curled at her sides. Some cold, wounded part of me wanted to stay angry a while longer. The rest of me set the binder on her desk instead. Then, let's fix it now, I said. We went through it together. Really together, for the first time, her sharp financial mind moving alongside mine instead of above it, and somewhere in the second hour I stopped being aware of the 40 floors of glass between us and the ground, and started being aware only of her, close enough that vetiver and winter flint filled every breath, her shoulder against mine as we bent over the same page. You caught this in March, she said. Quiet, staring at my original flagged email dated 8 months back. Before any of this, before the stairwell even, nobody believed me. I believe you. She looked up, and the distance in her eyes from the boardroom was entirely gone, replaced with something rawer. I have believed you since the moment you sat down on cold concrete instead of calling for help I explicitly could not survive having called. I have spent 8 months telling myself that gratitude was all it was. It wasn't. I looked for reasons to see you again because I wanted to see you again, and I was too much of a coward to say so until a woman I once almost married tried to destroy you to get to me. The office went very quiet. Somewhere outside the window, 41 floors down, the city kept moving, indifferent to both of us. Why me? I asked because I had to. You could have anyone. I don't want anyone. Her voice dropped lower, unsteady in a way I'd never heard from her. I want the woman who gave a stranger her own coat and asked for nothing back. I want the woman who remembers her mother's rice pudding and still tips the delivery boy with money she doesn't have. I want you, Ren Ashby, and I have wanted you since the moment you told me I didn't have to remember that night, and I have remembered every second of it anyway. I don't know which of us moved first. I only know that her hand found my jaw, careful, deliberate, and stopped there, waiting. Tell me to stop, she said, and I will. Don't stop. The kiss, when it came, was nothing like the cold I'd expected from a woman the whole company called Frost. It was warm and careful, and it tasted faintly of the coffee she hadn't finished that morning, and when we finally broke apart, she rested her forehead against mine and breathed out like she'd been holding it for 8 months. There's something I never told you, she said against my mouth. About that night. About why I put your name down. The office door slammed open before she could finish, Des filling the frame with a face gone white. They found the wire transfers, Des said. All of them. But Priscilla's already gone to the board with a counter-story. She's saying Ren planted the evidence to extort the company, and she's called an emergency session in 20 minutes. If we don't walk in with something bulletproof, she wins this outright. Vesper's spine straightened, the executive settling back over her like armor going on. But her hand found mine first, quick, fierce, before she let go. Then we walk in with something bulletproof, she said. Ren built the case. Ren presents it. Vesper, I've never spoken in front of a board in my life. Neither had I, the first time. Her eyes held mine, steady now, certain. You've been reading these numbers since before any of us knew what they meant. Nobody in that room will be able to argue with the truth. Let's go make them listen. The boardroom was fuller than it had been 4 days earlier, every seat taken, latecomers standing along the glass wall, word having traveled the way word always travels through a building built on secrets. Priscilla sat at the head of the table again, composed, radiant with false calm, already speaking when we walked in. And while I sympathize with Miss Castellan's evident personal entanglement here, the board cannot allow sentiment to override sentiment, Vesper said. Closing the door behind us with a click that silenced the whole room is not what brought us here, Priscilla. Evidence is. I had never spoken to a room full of powerful strangers in my life. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the binder, setting it on the table, but I opened it anyway, and I found the page I needed, and I made myself look up. Corinth's Freight Solutions has never shipped a single item in 4 years of existence, I said, and my voice, to my own surprise, came out steady. Every invoice was submitted in amounts $1 under the signature threshold, always by the same submitting account, always routed to the same 3 offshore holdings. Holdings registered, I found this morning, to an address in Nassau that also appears on Priscilla Vane's personal tax filings from 6 years ago, before she transferred the property to a shell trust. I turned the page. The total, over 2 years, is $4,100,000. A murmur went through the room. Priscilla's composure didn't crack, not yet, but something behind her eyes went very still and very cold. Fabrication, she said smoothly. Manufactured by a disgruntled employee under investigation for exactly this fraud. There's more, I said, and turned to the second tab. 8 months ago, Miss Castellan's rut suppressant formulation was altered without her authorization by a pharmacy account under corporate development's oversight. 6 days before a medical crisis that nearly killed her in an empty stairwell at 11 o'clock at night. The authorization carries your initials, Miss Vane, dated, timestamped. I have the pharmacy's confirmation email forwarded to me this morning by their compliance office once I explained what I'd found. The room had gone entirely silent now. I watched the color drain out of Priscilla's face in real time, watched 8 years of careful poise crack down the middle in front of the people whose respect she had spent her whole life curating. You tried to hurt her, I said, quieter now, and it wasn't for the board anymore, it was for her. You tried to hurt her because she chose someone she loved over a merger, and when that didn't work, you tried to destroy the one person who ever sat with her when she was too weak to protect herself. I found her that night, Priscilla. I was there. You weren't. You were never going to be, because you never once loved her enough to sit on cold concrete for a woman who couldn't do anything for you in return. Priscilla stood so fast her chair scraped the floor. This is a witch hunt orchestrated by a gold-digging clerk who saw an opportunity and, sit down, Priscilla, Vesper's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Every head in the room turned toward it instead, the way iron turns toward a magnet. The board has the documentation. Legal has been notified. Security is waiting outside this door to escort you to a room where you will explain $4,100,000 to people considerably less patient than I am. She let that settle, let the whole weight of the Frost of Meridian's reputation fill the silence. You spent 8 years insisting I was incapable of choosing anyone who wasn't handed to me by my mother. You were wrong twice, once with Inez, and now again with her. 2 security officers stepped through the door at Dez's signal. Priscilla looked around the table, searching for an ally, and found none. Found instead a room full of people rearranging, in real time, everything they had believed about who deserved fear in that building. You'll regret this, she hissed at me, on her way past. No, I said. I don't think I will. The door closed behind her. For a moment, nobody in the boardroom moved. Then, from the back wall, an older board member I didn't recognize began, slowly, to clap, and it spread through the room like a struck match, and I stood there in my 3-year-old cardigan with my mother's grief still living in my chest, and I understood for the first time in my life what it felt like to be seen. Vesper didn't let go of my hand for the rest of that meeting. Not once. They led Priscilla Vane out of Meridian Tower in handcuffs 11 days later, once the district attorney's office had finished its own accounting, which matched mine to the dollar. I wasn't there for the arrest. I was 2 floors up, back at a desk that was mine again, this time with a promotion attached to it and a title, Senior Forensic Analyst, that I had never once dared to imagine for myself. But Talia texted me a photograph from the lobby, and I looked at it for a long time before I put my phone away and went back to work, because some victories didn't need to be savored twice. Des found me at my new desk that afternoon, and for the first time since I'd met her, she was almost smiling. In 9 years, she said, setting a small box on my desk, I have never once seen her wait for anyone, not for a meeting, not for a car, not for anything. She nodded at the box. She waited 8 months for you and never said a word about it until it nearly cost her everything. Don't let her go back to waiting. Inside the box was a security badge, laminated, with my photo and a title that read, beneath my name, Floor 41, Permanent Access. I laughed, and then, without any warning at all, I cried. The good kind, the kind that didn't cost anything. I found Vesper that evening on the 41st floor, at the same window, though the light through it now was gold instead of gray. She turned when the door opened, and for once there was nothing guarded in her face at all. You never finished telling me, I said, crossing the room toward her, why you put my name down that night. Because some part of me, she said, already knew, before the rest of me caught up, that you were the only person whose hand I wanted to be holding if the worst ever happened. It took the rest of me 8 months and a boardroom disaster to admit it out loud. She reached into her breast pocket and drew out the tin of peppermints, worn now, the lid dented from months of carrying, half the mints long gone. I kept this, she said, every day. I told myself it was practical. Nausea prevention. A small, unguarded smile. It was never about the nausea. I noticed you'd never given it back. I never intend to. She set it gently on the windowsill between us, morning gold light catching the dented tin, and reached for my hands. Ren Ashby. I would like very much to stop being your emergency contact by accident and start being everything else to you on purpose. If you'll let me. Ask me properly, I said throat tight, with your words. She smiled, a real one, rare and complete, and asked. The proposal came 4 months later, on a Tuesday of all days, in the same stairwell where it had all begun, because Vesper Castellan had decided, once and for all, to make that gray concrete landing mean something better than fear. She knelt on the exact spot where I'd once pressed a cardigan to the back of her neck, opened a small velvet box, and told me that she had spent 34 years believing love was a liability her mother had taught her to prune away, and 8 months learning from a woman who sat with strangers on cold floors and asked for nothing, that love was not a weakness at all. It was the only strength that had ever actually held. I said yes before she finished the sentence. We were bonded on a soft evening in early spring, in a garden behind Vesper's house that I had, by then, started calling ours, with perhaps 40 guests instead of the 400 the Castellan name might once have demanded, Talia in the front row already crying, Des standing beside Vesper as her second with something dangerously close to a smile. Mister. Halverson, the night guard, given a seat of honor for reasons only the two of us understood, and Callum from it 2 rows back, who had asked me to coffee once, months earlier, and taken my gentle no with more grace than the story of the Frost of Meridian had ever led anyone to expect from that building. He raised his glass to us later, at the reception, and meant it. Our vows were short. Vespers was the shorter of the 2 5-sentences that undid me completely, ending with the line she'd first spoken to me half-conscious on a stairwell floor, and never once forgotten. I told you once not to let go of my hand until I told you it was safe. It's safe now, Ren. Don't let go anyway. When the bond settled between us at last, I felt it the way you feel a held breath finally released. Not just her scent, but some quiet, constant thread of her. Warmth where there had always been careful cold. And I understood that this was what Des had meant, all those months ago, about waiting. I never had to wait for her again. A year on, we drove 3 hours to the coast on a whim, because I had once mentioned, offhand, over rice pudding in a stairwell-adjacent life that felt impossibly far away, that I had never seen the ocean. Vesper had remembered, the way she remembered everything I ever gave her carelessly, and she stood beside me at the base of the Belmont Lighthouse, with her arms around me from behind, and her chin resting on my shoulder while I looked at the water for the first time in my life and cried without any shame at all. Priscilla Vane was sentenced to 11 years for wire fraud and embezzlement, and separately, quietly, to a restraining order the court granted without a single objection once Vesper's medical records were entered as evidence. The company she had spent her life scheming to inherit paid, in the end, for the crime of trying to break the one person who had never once let it break her. These days, my mother's chipped mug with the painted wren sits on a shelf in a kitchen that is mine and Vesper's both, next to a matching one Vesper had commissioned without a chip, because she said I deserved one whole thing that had never been broken. Some mornings I still catch her, mid-meeting on a video call, pausing to ask someone across the world if they've eaten. Des says it started with me. I think it never really stopped being who she was, it only needed someone to notice. The tin of peppermints still sits on our windowsill, dented, half empty, catching the first light every morning the way it did the day she set it there. Some objects hold more than they were ever built to carry. Some people do too. I used to believe that being invisible was a kind of safety, that if no one truly saw you, no one could truly hurt you either. I know better now. Being seen, fully and on purpose by the right person, costs nothing at all. It only ever gives. The end.